Okay. Welcome slightly belatedly to the Spectrum panel. I am McKenna from the UK. I work for the organisation called Collections Trust, and we are the people who produce and look after Spectrum. On the panel today are two other colleagues from other countries. So Monica Hagendorn-Zauper from Germany and Alexandra Matos from Portugal. For the next hour or so, I will be going through information about Spectrum and also showing you the Collections Trust website and what we've got to offer. Then we will be hearing from Monica and Alexander about the actual how they're working with Spectrum in their countries. Then we're going to have a question and answer session, so you can ask questions during the during my talk and Monica and Alexander's speaking, but we won't answer them till after all of us have spoken. Okay, so the title of my talk is Spectrum in the UK and Elsewhere. And the first section is I'm going to talk about how Spectrum was developed. So it started off in the 1960s to 1970s with something called the Information Retrieval Group of the MA, the Museums Association in the UK. Now, usually this is known by the acronym of ERGMA. This was an organisation.
Cette organisation était une sorte de groupe assez souple de volontaires, de bénévoles qui travaillaient sur des cartes, sur des fiches. À cette époque, dans le musée, personne, hormis des organisations très spécialisées, ne disposait d'ordinateurs. L'idée, c'était donc d'élaborer des fiches sur n'importe quel objet, histoire sociale, militaire, numismatie et ainsi de suite. C'est une organisation qui a été fondée en 1977, l'association de documentation des musées, aussi appelée MDA. Cette association a été financée tout d'abord par la Commission des musées et galeries, MCG, et un peu plus tard par l'organisation qui l'a remplacée, l'Association des musées et des bibliothèques, MLA. Spectrum, en tant que tel, a été publié pour la première fois en 1995. Juste avant cela, une norme de données a été publiée. Tout est donc sur base papier, il n'y a pas de version électronique. Environ 3 ans plus tard, Spectrum 2 est né. Donc une version actuelle.
In 2005, Spectrum 3 was launched, and again, this is still being run by MDA. Then in 2009, the sort of sub-version, Spectrum 3.2, still by the MDA, but we then changed our name to Collections Trust, and we're funded by MLA, but now we're funded by an organisation called Arts Council England, and about half of our funding is from them, specifically to do with Spectrum. Spectrum 4 came out in 2011, and the latest version, the one that we're going to be talking about mostly today, Spectrum 5, was launched in 2017. One thing to note, before Spectrum 5, Spectrum was spelt with capital letters. That's because it was an acronym, but nobody knows what the acronym is, and you would only find it by looking at the first version of Spectrum. So it's never been used. The reason, one of the reasons that Spectrum is called Spectrum, apart from the fact that it's supposed to be a spectrum of things to do with collections management, is there was a 1970s sort of puppet thing called Captain Scarlet, and the organization he worked for was called Spectrum. So that's the real reason. Okay, so how was Spectrum developed in terms of its how it should be? So what we have is a series of themes that we did in the development. It has to be collective, and that means that Spectrum was, and it still is, developed by its users. So we work in response to users rather than we make up Spectrum and then ask users to say it's okay. So it's a bit of a two-way thing. The other theme is the idea of it being pragmatic, and what we're trying to do here is reflect real live issues in real museums. So we're very confident that what we have produced will be of use to all museums. Obviously, originally it was museums in the UK, but it included national museums, for example, the British Museum, but also museums run by volunteers, museums in association with universities, military museums, and volunteer-run museums. The third thing that I'd like to mention as a theme is the idea of Spectrum is inclusive. And what we're doing there is having a practical approach where things called minimum standards, I'll explain what they are in a bit, are achievable goals. And also the spectrum allows different museums to work in different ways. So it's not a monolithic standard, it allows people to adapt it to work in their own way. The last thing in terms of a theme is the idea of it being realistic. And one thing is it's not perfect, and perfection itself was never going to be achieved. Spectrum is a process to be added to and to be refined over time. So if you notice something that you disagree with in Spectrum, you can tell us about it and we'll consider it. And every so often we have a big system of getting feedback, and that's how we did the latest version. Okay, so what's the benefits of developing Spectrum in this way? It's a synthesis, and you can think of it as the distilled wisdom of a community. So Spectrum is a community standard. Also, we have a common language to describe the work that we do. It's also consistent in terms of how we record and share information about collections management and use. We also it defines practice and skills and a way to share knowledge and share work. It also leads to improved collection management practice and also possibly a more creative use of collections. It acts as a benchmark for improvement. So you can start off with no implementation of Spectrum and work towards an improved collection management system. It also works internally within an organization as an advocacy tool, in terms of you can say, this is the Spectrum standard, this is the standard that is being used by the heritage community, please allow us to do that. And that's one of the things that people who are managing collections say to us. It's very useful to be able to show to senior management to actually do something about getting more funds, getting more resources. And finally, particularly in the UK, we have something called the Museum Accreditation Standard, and Spectrum, at least part of Spectrum, supports museum accreditation. So this general standard, part of it means that in the UK, you have to implement part of Spectrum to become an accredited museum. Okay, so the second part of my talk is going to be an overview of Spectrum 5. However, just to start at the previous version in Spectrum 4, I just wanted to show you what has been changed in terms of these things called procedures. So these are the activities that museums do, generally speaking. And as you can see, there are I've coloured some of the procedures in red with a line through them. Some of them are orange, and I'll explain what these mean. Those that have a line through them, pre-entry and transport, have been removed from Spectrum 5. Pre-entry, and that was particularly aimed at archaeology and other things like natural science, that has been rolled into object entry. Transport, again, we were asked to do that separately, but now it's been rolled into location and movement control. And the ones with different colours in orange are different names of the procedures in Spectrum 5. So there's been some change there. So to summarise it, here are the procedures in Spectrum 5. The first 9 from object entry to documentation planning are the procedures that are mandated for for museum accreditation in the UK, and they're all about making sure that you are accountable for the objects in your collection. The next 2, the condition checking and technical assessment and collection care and conservation, are not mandated directly for museum accreditation in the UK, but they recognise that it would be a good idea to actually have those as well. The last ones, from valuation to audit, are the other ones. Some of them, I think, are definitely more important than others. We've added another 2, reproduction, which is obviously about creating reproductions. That was really part of use of collections. And finally, a new one, which is something called collections review. So that is when you look at your collections in terms of perhaps finding if you have got significant objects, or you're looking to reduce the size of your collection by seeing ones that don't objects that you have that don't meet your current collections development policy. Okay. So for each procedure, you get sections. So the first one is definition. So that's a brief sentence saying what the procedure is about. The second section is called scope, and that expands on what you are doing in this procedure. Then comes the spectrum standard, and that is in 2 parts. It includes policy, and that's so for each procedure you should have a policy. The policy itself could be in a separate document for each procedure, but usually it's combined into perhaps one collection management policy. And the way policy works is that we give a series of questions that the policy should be able to answer. And the second part of the spectrum standard are the minimum requirements. And what they are is, however you actually implement spectrum, you must meet these minimum requirements, and also there's a table which has these in, and we also say why it is important that these minimum requirements are implemented. So to give you an idea, here's an example for object entry. So object entry is the logging of all objects in your care for whatever reason, and so on and so forth as they enter the organization. The scope, as you can see there, including the fact that this object entry is a Spectrum primary procedure. The Spectrum standard has a series of questions, so you can see you should have a policy of in what circumstances will you accept objects into your care, who's authorized to do this, and so on. And then on the right hand side you can see there's minimum requirements, so you should be able to account for all objects left in your care, and the reason is you don't lose track of objects left with you for a short time, for example, as an inquiry, and so on. So each procedure has these sections. Right, the next what section is called the suggested procedure. Now, the reason why we call it the suggested procedure is that it is possible for an organization to create their own procedure, but to help you in terms of making it simple, we have a suggested procedure which is written rather than anything else, and you have a set of steps, and that gives you what you need to do at the step. It also links to what we call units information, which can be fields in a database but don't have to be. In fact, in theory, they don't have to be in a database at all. We also give you advice about how to record the information, including the people involved in it, so the actors, dates, we suggest you use a standard format, and then various other things, including using a standard term source. We also give guidance notes in the form of records, so how you would use those. Here's a sample again from the object entry one in terms of, so the actual steps are the ones with the little green bar to the left, and then it goes into detail about what you should be doing, and including things like creating an entry record and a receipt and so on and so forth. You can also see there are some green pieces of text. So for example, under loaning information, it gives you what these units of information are. If you run your cursor over those or click on these links in the online version, you go to these units of information. For those who like to have a visual representation, we also have a workflow, and that reflects the suggested procedural steps in the actual written version. It's obviously the text is simplified. It shows inputs to this procedure, so that might be policy or it might be another procedure, and also it shows what to record. So here's an example, which I hope you can see. It's a little bit blurry for me, but you can see the ones in the center are these actual steps. The boxes to the left are the links. So if you want to arrange transport, if relevant, you need to go to location and move control and then come back to this box and then go on. You can see where it says make a record of the object, there's an arrow to the right and it tells you to record the units of information in those groups. So in terms of the information requirements, this is information that is needed to support the procedures, describe objects, reproductions, and texts describing objects. Actors, so these are the persons, organizations, or people. People in this case are ethnographic people. Also, it contains descriptions of groups that you need to look at, and also the units of information in the group. So here's two examples, the acquisition information and the rights information. So you can see under those there are multiple units of information. In total, there are over 400. So the units of information themselves, they contain a definition, what the unit is, how to record it, give some examples, so it's not all the possible examples, how to use the unit information and which information group it appears in. So you can now see here's a unit information called title, and here's the definition, how to record it. It gives examples, as I mentioned before. So the same, for example, the same title can be assigned to one or more objects, and so on. So I'll show you a bit more about this when we go to look at our to the website. So spectrum in action in the world. Supporting spectrum in the UK, what we have is that it's based on current practice. It supports museum accreditation, as I mentioned before. Software is being developed to for people to use spectrum, and then we have this concept which is called compliance. And for a system to be compliant, it has to represent in some way all the units of spectrum. We also give advice, which can be local and specific to a particular organisation. We do training, which is with a network in the UK called the Museum Development Network. So we have a member of staff who used to, until COVID, travel around the country giving training to various organisations. We also have the website, which I'll show you in a while. We also do publications. In addition to Spectrum, we have Spectrum standards in action and various other things. We also have tools. So we also sell forms which allow people to do things like object entry or transfer of title and so on, and accession registers, and all of those are of archival quality. And finally, the other thing that we do is we have in the past at least developed terminologies, so thesauri, but we do now give links to the things that are available. So outside the UK, so here you should have all of these if you're going to be supporting Spectrum in your country. And in addition, you're going to have to translate it and localize it. So what should you do if you want to actually use or translate or localize it in your country? Well, the sort of first thing that you need to know, and I'm assuming that everybody in the room is knowing about it. So secondly, you should be reading it and understanding it in English. You then want to be starting to implement it in your institutions. There needs to be software, and when I say done in secret, I think a lot of the, if not most, of the systems in the world are done by Spectrum partners, and these are the people who we test when they're ready to do Spectrum compliance. You then need to do things like translating and localization. So translating is doing it into a non-British English language, and localization, making sure it's relevant. You can do it quickly or slowly. We don't tell you how fast to do it. And then also you need to be starting to support it nationally. Okay, so what do you need to do this translation and localization? Well, it helps to have a lead organisation. Both Monica and Alexander work for the lead organisations for their own countries. You obviously will need a network of people to help and oversee the process. You need somebody who can actually translate from the English version into your own language. In particular, they need the skill, so it can't, generally speaking, it can't be uh, a translator who doesn't understand the specialist terminology and words that we use. You also need to be aware of localization needs. You need a budget. However, if you haven't got a budget, it will take a very, very long time. And also, working with Collections Trust, we can give very minimal help with it. We are not funded to actually help with you to do it. We can give, as a limited help, but we have recently worked with an organisation in the UK which works with countries outside the UK called the British Council, and they've helped fund various translations. For example, the one in Spanish and the one in Arabic is one. And finally, you need aftercare to actually do some work. Okay, so what have we got so far? On our website, we have Spectrum 5 in Dutch, and that's for the Netherlands and Belgium. We have it in French, and that was developed by Chin in Canada, but we're assured that it works in metropolitan France as well. We have it in Norwegian and also in Swedish. Coming soon to the site, it will be in Arabic and Spanish. I think Spanish will be launched to Peruvian museums next week. So obviously that will work for any Spanish speakers. So we have all the ICOM languages for Spectrum. There are also earlier versions in German, Portuguese for Brazil and Portugal, Polish and Ukrainian. German and Portuguese, they are or will be starting to work on Spectrum 5, but because they've already worked on Spectrum earlier, it should be, relatively speaking, easy. And also the Poles have literally today announced that they have to have it done by the end of the month. I'm not sure how they're going to do it by the end of the month, but that's what they're saying to us. Okay. Okay, so if you have any questions afterwards, please contact me. And now what I'm going to do is go to our website, which I hope is somewhere. No, it's not going to be that. Hold on. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and share again. So hopefully everybody is seeing our website. So what I will do, if you bear with me a second, is go through the various things that are on our website and point out some of the things that we do. Here is the pages for Spectrum, and as you can see there, they are in English, French, Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, and as I said, Spanish and Arabic will be added. So if you go to the procedural bits, here is object entry, and then say we wanted it in French. Here is the French version, and so on. If you click on the Spectrum standard, you can view it here, but if you want to look at it as a PDF, you can click on this, and again, it's the same for the other language versions. So you click on that, I won't do it here. You will download the PDF and you can look at it there. Go back to the English version, because I can only speak English and rubbish. If we go back to object entry and go to the suggested procedure, as I mentioned, you can see that there's a link to, and if you click on it, you get it to pop up, and there's the information about the brief description unit of information. If we go back again to Spectrum, you can see that there's this appendix with all the information groups in it. So if you go to object information, so that's the second way to get into the units. And so on. So that's the main pages for Spectrum. The other thing that we have for Spectrum is if you click on where it says resources, and I'll explain what the other sets of resources are about in a second. Here are the Spectrum related resources, and what they are a set of sometimes stuff that Collections Trust has produced, but also material that other people have produced to help. So if I go to acquisition and accessioning, there are things like there's a how do you trace living people, contemporary collecting toolkit, how to label and mark objects using a particular method. So if I go there, this is if you go to their website, you can see their videos. Some of the videos you can access from here. So that's that. So for every for every procedure, sorry, there is a set of resources. The other resources that we have a special set which are about what's happening with collections during this time of the coronavirus. So things like how do you keep your museum safe? There was a series of panels that we did, and then things like what to do on meeting security environmental conditions. So there's lots of things there. The second one is a set of things about digitization, and it's if you go in digitals, you can see there are things about that, and there are digital pathways which include things on social media, analytics. So all this is free, by the way. You don't have to be you don't have to log on or be a member of anything to get access to this. We go back to resources. There are resources associated with the accreditation standard. So if you want to have a look at the standard, this is probably the best way in, because for each of these sections of the standard, it tells you various things like what you have to do. So if I go to collections information, what it says is to meet accreditation standards for collections information, you have to have an approved documentation policy and to follow the primary procedures, Spectrum documentation procedures. So, and obviously there are more than that. So it includes things like organizational health, governance and management, planning and resources. So I haven't got the time to go through everything, but I encourage you to have a look at these. Obviously, unfortunately, all these are going to be in English. I think it would be possible for certainly the ones that we produce for them to be translated if you asked us to. The next one is about choosing collection software. So we have the various information about the various products that are from the Spectrum partners. These include, for example, this is pretty at random, let's say Museum Plus, and there you've got all the information that you would need to know about that. You can also check whether it's Spectrum compliant and so on. We also have a section on cultural property advice. So there's things, you can see all the ones there. So it's ethical context, legal contexts, and things about international law, UK law, and so on. We also have a section on terminologies, and this lists all the terminologies that we know about. If you know of any more, please tell us about it. Recently, we've added one for LGBTQ information called slightly humorously, the Homosaurus. But there's more interesting ones, I think, for you. There's the things for waterways. There's something called SHIC. There's also, if I can find it, it's going to be the last one. The ICOM vocabulary of basic terms for catalogue and costume. And if you go there, you can see it's in Dutch, German, sorry, Spanish, French, and so on. And again, it's all free. And I'd just like to thank the Arts Council of England for funding us, where what's known as a national portfolio organisation. So we get 5 years of funding that's been extended for another year because of coronavirus. In terms of the amount of money that we have, it's roughly speaking £200,000, which I don't know would be in euros or any other currency. We also do consultancy work as well. And also the Spectrum partners who I mentioned earlier also are the only people who have rights to commercially use Spectrum, and there are also the idea of us testing them for compliance is one of the things that are provided if you're a Spectrum partner. Okay, I think that's all I want. Oh, sorry, the other thing is the shop. I just remembered. So we do things like accession registers, as I mentioned, the books. So they include Spectrum, but things like this one we published for something called ABTEM, the guidelines for the care of large and working historic objects, but that's also available as a PDF. Then there's some practical guides about collection management, copyright, and so on. And I think that's all I wanted to say.